Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. In this episode, we're talking about one of the hardest truths in elk hunting, and honestly, one of the hardest truths for hunters to accept. Most elk hunters never become consistent. They might kill an elk once, they might get lucky every few years, they might even have a great season here and there, but true consistency, the ability to show up year after year in different units, different seasons, different conditions, and still create real opportunities, that's kind of rare. And it's not because elk are impossible to hunt. It's not because tags are too hard to draw. It's not because gear isn't good enough. And it's definitely not because elk have some kind of magic that only a few people are born with. It's because most hunters never make the shift from hoping things happen to controlling what they can. Today, I want to break down why consistency is so elusive for a lot of hunters, what actually separates hunters who figure it out from those who don't, and what changes when you stop chasing moments and start building systems. This is not about calling sequences or secret spots. This is about the real reasons some hunters quietly get it done year after year, while others stay stuck wondering why it never quite comes together. Before we get into it, here's how this episode is going to be structured. First, we're going to talk about why most hunters confuse experience with progress. Then we're going to break down the difference between random success and repeatable success. We'll talk about how inconsistency is usually self-inflicted. We'll cover the moment when good hunters actually start to change. Then we'll get into the systems consistent hunters build physically, mentally, and strategically. And finally, we'll close with what you should be doing right now if you want next season to look different than the last one. Let's get into it. Most elk hunters believe that if they just spend enough years in the woods, consistency will eventually show up. They think time automatically equals improvement, more seasons, more miles, more effort. And a lot of times I believe in those same things, but time alone doesn't build consistency. Intentional learning does. I've watched hunters spend 10, 15, even 20 seasons making the same mistakes over and over. They go to the same unit. They hunt the same way. They react to the same problems with the same decisions. And when it doesn't work, they chalk it up to bad luck, bad weather, bad timing, or bad elk. They say things like, elk just weren't talking, or they must have moved out, or pressure ruined it. And sometimes those things can be true, but the uncomfortable part is that those things are always true to some degree. Pressure exists every year. Weather changes every year, and elk behavior shifts constantly. Consistency doesn't come from eliminating uncertainty. It comes from learning how to operate inside of it. The problem is that a lot of hunters, they never slow down long enough to evaluate their decisions. They remember the emotions of a season, frustration, excitement, disappointment, but they don't analyze the process. They remember what they saw, but not why they moved when they did. They remember where elk were, but not what they did that influenced that outcome. Experience without reflection doesn't sharpen judgment, it just hardens habits. And that's why so many hunters feel like they've put in the time, but still don't feel confident going into a season. They're not sure if they're actually improving or just repeating the same cycle. The next big issue is that most hunters mistake random success for progress. Killing an elk does not automatically mean you hunted well. That might sound harsh, but it's true. I've killed elk on days when I made bad decisions and I got lucky. I've also eaten tags on seasons where I made great decisions and just didn't get a break. If you don't separate outcome from execution, you'll never become consistent. Random success reinforces bad habits. When something works by accident, hunters tend to repeat the behavior without understanding why it worked. They chase the moment instead of the process. They might think, well, I killed once doing this. This must be the way. But then the next season, different conditions show up and the same approach falls apart. Consistent hunters don't chase what worked once. They study what worked across multiple scenarios. They ask better questions. Why did elk use that slope? Why did they move at that time? Why did pressure push them that direction instead of another? Why did my body feel strong on that climb but cooked the next day? They're not just stacking experiences, they're extracting lessons. That's the difference. Another reason a lot of elk hunters stay inconsistent is because they hunt reactively instead of proactively. They wait for elk to do something before they do anything. They wait to hear bugles before committing to a plan. They wait to see tracks before trusting an area. They wait until they're exhausted before backing off. They wait until the season is slipping away before taking risks. Reactive hunting feels busy, but it's rarely very efficient. Proactive hunters move with intention. They anticipate pressure. They anticipate wind changes. They anticipate how elk will respond before it happens. That doesn't mean they're always right. It means they're rarely surprised. When you hunt reactively, everything feels chaotic. You're always adjusting, always second guessing, always feeling like you're behind. When you hunt proactively, you still adjust, but from a position of control instead of panic. Consistency comes from reducing emotional decision making. One of the biggest turning points I see hunters make is when they finally accept that inconsistency is usually self inflicted. That's not an insult, it's empowering. When you believe the problem is always external, somebody else's fault, the unit, the draw odds, the weather, the moon phase, you give up control. When you realize that your preparation, your decision making, and your execution matter more than any single variable, everything changes. Consistent hunters take ownership of their outcomes without beating themselves up. They don't sugarcoat mistakes, but they don't spiral either. They recognize patterns in their own behavior. They notice when they move too fast. They notice when they avoid tough climbs. They notice when they abandon a plan too early. And instead of just promising to try harder next year, they adjust their system. This leads to one of the most important shifts a hunter can make. Consistent hunters stop hunting seasons and start building systems. They don't just think in terms of opening day and closing day. They think in terms of the entire year. They build physical systems so that their body doesn't become the limiting factor. They build mental systems so stress doesn't hijack decisions. They build strategic systems so each hunt fits into a larger framework instead of standing alone. This is where a lot of hunters fall off. They train randomly. They scout randomly. They consume information randomly. Then they expect consistent results. That doesn't work. Consistency is built when your training supports your hunting, your scouting supports your decisions, and your mindset supports both of those. Let's talk about the physical side first, because this is where a lot of people misunderstand what consistency actually requires. Consistent elk hunters are not necessarily the fastest or strongest people on the mountain, but they are durable. They recover well. They can repeat effort day after day. That matters more than raw output. If your body breaks down halfway through a hunt, your decision making changes. You avoid climbs. You shorten your loops. You justify easier options. And most of the time, you don't even realize you're doing it. Your body quietly dictates your strategy. Consistent hunters build their bodies to handle volume, not heroics. They train single leg strength. They build joint integrity. They prioritize recovery. They don't show up hoping adrenaline will carry them through. They show up knowing their body can do the work. Now let's talk about the mental side, because this is where consistency really lives, right? Most elk hunters struggle with patience, not because they're weak, but because uncertainty is uncomfortable. Quiet days feel like failure. Long sits feel unproductive. Not seeing elk creates doubt. Inconsistent hunters chase relief from that kind of discomfort. They move when they shouldn't. They abandon areas too early. They force action to feel better. Consistent hunters understand that boredom and uncertainty are just part of the process. They don't confuse activity with progress. They're willing to let things unfold. They're willing to wait for windows instead of forcing outcomes. And when it's time to move, they move decisively, not emotionally. This level of patience doesn't come from confidence alone. It comes from preparation and trust in a system. Strategically, consistent hunters also simplify. They don't try to hunt everything. They don't bounce between ideas every hour. They commit to terrain, patterns, and plans long enough to gather real information. They understand that elk don't need to cooperate perfectly for a plan to be working. They just need to behave predictably enough. When something doesn't work, they don't throw the whole plan away. They adjust one variable at a time. This is a huge difference. Most inconsistent hunters make wholesale changes based on limited feedback. One bad morning and everything changes. One blown stalk and confidence disappears. Consistent hunters zoom out. They look for trends, not just the moments. At some point, hunters who become consistent stop asking, why didn't it work? And start asking, what did this teach me? That question changes everything. It shifts the focus from frustration to learning. It turns setbacks into data. It removes emotion from analysis. And once that shift happens, progress accelerates because now every season, successful or not, it moves you forward. Step into the backcountry and step up your elk hunting game at Elk Camp 2026. This isn't a seminar, it's an immersive experience with real field training alongside successful elk hunters Matt and Saxton Hartsky. You'll learn how elk think and move, break down terrain like a pro, call with confidence, and practice 3 days of real-world elk hunting scenarios that mirror what you'll face on your own hunt. This camp was built to bridge the gap between where you are and where you want to be in the mountains. With limited spots and hands-on coaching, you'll walk away sharper, more prepared, and ready to hunt with purpose and confidence. Elk Camp 2026. Sharpen your edge. Register now and prepare for the season like never before at backboneunlimited.com. So what should you be doing right now if you want to become a more consistent elk hunter? You should be building the pieces that don't depend on tags. You should be evaluating last season honestly, not emotionally, honestly. Where did your body limit you? Where did you rush decisions? Where did you abandon plans too early? Where did you hesitate when you should have committed? You should be training for durability, not just random fitness. You should be sharpening your ability to read terrain and pressure. You should be building patience instead of chasing motivation. And most importantly, you should be building a system that makes you better regardless of whether you kill an elk next season or not. Because consistency isn't built in a single hunt. It's built in the quiet months, the boring months, January, February, March, the months where no one is watching and nothing feels urgent. That's where the difference is made. If you're serious about going deeper into this, about building the kind of systems, preparation, and mindset that actually lead to consistent success, that's exactly why I built Team Backbone. Team Backbone isn't about shortcuts or secrets. It's about structure. Inside, you get tools, training, strategy, and direct access that help you put this kind of thinking into action. It's built for hunters who are tired of guessing and ready to start operating with intention. If that sounds like you, check out Team Backbone under the membership tab at backboneunlimited.com. Thanks for being here. Until next time, train harder, hunt smarter, and never settle.